You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and good to know that you're still all out there. Welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And I am Mighty Blue, the ultimate midlife crisis. Today's show is sponsored by Evergreen Adventure Foods, and you can hear about them just before our main guest. Well, we've got a really good show today, and I've got some news to share. I'll also be starting a weekly shout-out, and we're following yet another 2020 hiker still making his way along the trail. Add to that the fact that Fozzie is starting his walk on the AT in my reading of his book, Balancing on Blue, and you'll realise that I've got a lot to squeeze into the show. First off, we have something of a trail legend, Barney Mann, far better known as Scout. Specifically, he is a legend of the PCT, though he is a Triple Crowner, but it's his association with the PCT that he probably identifies with the most. He's got quite the story, which is a bit of a result because he's written about it, and we'll be talking about his book as well as his stellar hiking life and the extraordinary way in which he gives back to the trail. After Barney, I'll be introducing you to Bill Tickner, or Mr. President. He too has quite the hiking pedigree, so it'll be good to catch up with him. But before we get into it, let's hear about this. Have you guys ever tried Evergreen Adventure Foods? No? Let me tell you about them. You may remember that Toast and Jams were great guests on the show a few weeks back and shared their terrific hiking stories and how they came to start this business. They were sick of the amount of plastic they saw in the backcountry and decided to do something about it. All the while they were looking for great tasting nutritious meals. Well, their meals are not only packed with nutrients, but they are also packed in a fully compostable pouch. So no more plastic to litter up the outdoors. I've tried their chili mac and their bella pasta. Both were excellent. The meals are 100% plant-based, meat and dairy-free, loaded with real ingredients. What is not to love, eh? Oh, and one more thing. Every meal purchase helps give back to the trail organisations and public lands. Partnerships with the ACC, PCTA, Wildlife Conservation, the Arizona Trail Association, and Leave No Trace, with more to come. Check them out at evergreenadventurefoods.com. I really hope you try out their stuff. It's good for you, it's good for the trail, and it tastes great. Thanks, Toast and Jams. So let's meet Barney Mann, or Scout. His publicist wrote to me with a whole bunch of questions I could ask him. As you'd imagine, I totally ignored them, and we just had a chat. Here's Scout. Well, we've got another vintage hiker on the show today, rather like myself. This is Barney Mann, otherwise known as Scout. Hey, Scout, how are you?
I'm doing great, and I have not been called a vintage hiker in a while. That's cool, Steve.
It's a lovely name. It's a lovely name being called a vintage hiker. But you started off your hiking when you were quite a young lad. Tell us about hiking in the High Sierra.
Well, I come from parents who have never hiked, never camped. I think 5 times they went out, and each time they said, last time for us. But what they did do when I was 13 is they took me to Boy Scout troop meetings every week.
Right.
And at age 13, I ended up in the High Sierra. I didn't weigh 80 pounds, and yet I had a pack on my back that weighed at least half my weight. I was miserable. I missed cold Coca-Cola. It rained every day. And Steve, I fell in love with it. I was a dink, the smallest kid in my class. And yet out there, if I kept up, I was the same as the big kids. And out there, every day I saw things that you wouldn't see on a museum wall.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, that struck me when we spoke previously. When I asked you what it was about that hiking did for you at that young age, your reply about you being the smallest boy in your class, but it didn't matter out there. Tell us about that. I mean, how does that manifest itself when you're on the trail? You got to pack probably about half your weight, as you say, or maybe even twice your weight. What was it like out there as a small kid?
Well, here's the contrast. Back at home, gym class, I'd be standing there in my skinny little legs and gym shorts, and I'd be one of the last three picked. And I would say, please pick me now so I'm not the last one. Yeah. Out there, I held my own. I can tie knots. I can set up our tube tents. If anyone remembers tube tents out there, these plastic rolls that were just a roll, and it you had, with the condensation, it felt like it was raining inside as well as outside.
Nice.
But I had the skill set, and literally the big boys looked at me entirely differently. I was one of them because I was out there and I was doing it, and that was huge.
Isn't that an amazing thing? It's a terrible indictment of bullying, I guess, in many ways, because you're sometimes casually bullied, even though people don't know they're bullying. They are bullying the little kids, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. I had to dance as fast as I could, not to be the kid who was picked on.
Yeah, cool. And so you're out there, and let's face it, the High Sierra is not the easiest place to hike, is it? Apparently, I've not done it. I mean, I've tried the John Muir Trail twice and failed twice. So, why do they take you such a tough hike to start with?
So, the scout leaders I had, and I love saying their names: Mr. Massey, Mr. Quinn, and Mr. Metcalf, ex-World War II officers, and they would not have said this was hard, because that was their mindset. Cool. You know, they were wiry, tough guys, and we'll take these kids out in a wiry, tough environment, and they will do fine. We expect that of them, and they will. We did training hikes beforehand. This is the 60s. It was a bit of a different attitude. So here we are. We are in the middle of the southern High Sierra. We saw one other party of two the entire week. Wow. We came across beaver dams. We in a small little thumbnail spring that you had to wait for minutes to fill up a metal canteen of water. Remember metal canteens? And there was one of these little springs we couldn't use because there was a bat that had died in it and was sitting there. So this was wild in an entirely different way. I didn't have to watch on TV and see Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett. I was out there. I got to do this.
And as a 13-year-old, that's quite a special thing. And funnily enough, I think we're all 13-year-olds out on the trail, aren't we now? And I think that's what it is. You've got this permission to act like a kid, really, haven't you, again, and go and have an adventure.
Yeah. And today, at 68, anytime I'm on the trail, and probably you too, Steve, I still have permission to be that wonder-eyed 13-year-old.
That's cool. So you backpacked quite, you said pretty much most of your life, or all of your life, but it wasn't until your 30th wedding anniversary, you romantic old fool, that you and your wife took on the Pacific Crest Trail. Firstly, what did she think of that as a celebration? So
many times with the hiking couple, you'll hear it was one of their dreams and not so much the others. Yeah. This was equally both our dream.
Oh, really?
So she was every bit as passionate about it as I was. In fact, people, people often will prepare an itinerary, where they think they'll be every day. Sure. This is no lie. She spent hundreds of hours working on this itinerary beforehand. And anytime she was joyful. When she was out there, we had the time of our lives. If you were to ask her today, so this is 13 years ago, we can tell you, each of us independently, she may be 7 years younger than me, but she's still over 60.
She'll thank you for that, by the
way. Each of us could tell you a story for each and every day out there. That's how important it was to us. That's how it imprinted.
But how did you come to it? I mean, you said you'd be backpacking all the time. Was long distance hiking not a thing that was really on your radar because of family work and that sort of thing? Yeah. Or did you suddenly say, this is what we want to do?
It wasn't suddenly. We had 3 kids. We took our son backpacking 3 different times before he was 1 year old, much to my non-camping parents' horror.
Right.
There wasn't a year that went by that we didn't backpack a couple times.
Right.
And so when it came to our kids getting older, at some point, 10, 12 years beforehand, we started setting our camp on doing this long hike. And in 2003, we said, we're going to do the John Muir Trail, the trail that you referred to a while ago.
Yeah.
And the JMT is the creme de la creme of the entire Pacific Crest Trail. 211 roadless miles, the longest roadless stretch of trail in the United States. Averages above 10,000 feet. And we did it thinking we'll either come all this knowing a through hike's not in our...
yeah, good test.
Or we'll come off it and we will be even more impassioned to do it. And that was 2003. And when we came off it, we were just even more impassioned. My gosh, we spent 2 weeks out there. What will it be like to spend 5 months out there?
Yes. So, but you had some we're going to come to your book later on, which I know you wrote about this, which is you had some really testing weather out there, didn't you? You know, you had some pretty tough times as well. And there's a quote in the book that I read on your website. It says, I think it was your wife's birthday, and I'm saying this from memory, and I took my notes the other day. It was your wife's birthday, and somebody said, what does she want as a present? She said she just wants to get through the day. Oh, my gosh, what was that day like?
So I have a photo from the day before. This is 2007. We're finishing up the Pacific Crest Trail. We have hiked for 5 months. We've come 2,600 miles. We can smell Canada, and incredibly early snowstorms start happening. Right. And we are literally the day with a little bit of weather window. She is breaking through fresh snow above her knees. And so this morning that you just referred to, we wake up for the first time in 30 years. I've forgotten her birthday, and Steve, she forgot her birthday too.
That's a good thing.
And another hiker who was around us as we're there, we had a foot of snow the night before, so it's snow on top snow. We're about to climb 2,000 dang feet. We have one last place we can pull out, 18 miles from Canada. It's the last thing we want to do. And
Did you consider it though? Pulling out at that stage, 18 miles to go? I can't believe it. Was it that bad?
It was that bad. And in fact, as you'll read in the book, we made 3 separate independent attempts to get to Canada.
Wow.
And her birthday was on the 2nd. And 10 miles later, 6 hours later, because that's what it took us to get this 10 miles, we did pull out at Hart's Pass. It was the most sorrowful thing. There's a sign. Yeah, there's a sign that says how far left to Canada. And we took these sad little pictures, and there's like 8 inches of fresh snow on top of the sign, because we swore to ourselves, we are not going to get seriously hurt, and we will never put someone else at risk because they have to rescue us. And that was the only sound decision. We were losing the trail. It was before GPS of any sort. And every little pass, we were losing the trail. It was the only decision to make.
Wow. So what happened then? So did you get back on? I mean...
Oh, this is the mighty climax of the book.
Oh, right. So, I can't. No, in that case, don't share it. We're going to talk about the book later, and I won't share the mighty climax then.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you're right, absolutely right. Because you're absolutely right. You clearly made it. You definitely made it. Right. Now, of course, that was in your backyard, and I suppose the PCT was your normal. You would expect that to do that first. Did you have thoughts at that time of going on to do a Triple Crown, or even hiking another long distance trail together again?
So I felt the same as if someone had whispered to my 13-year-old self and said, Barney, or Scout, my trailer, Scout, someday you're going to hike from Mexico to Canada. My eyes would glow with wonder, and I'd probably run and hide.
Yeah, sure.
And at the end of the PCT, it was the same. Here, I'd done this amazing thing. I'd had these 5 months with the most amazing people in the world. And a part of me knew I wanted to do it again. Yeah, that I wanted to do at least one
straight
of the
away.
Straight
My
away.
first thought was I would never, ever hike again as long as I live. Really, that was absolutely my
Really,
first thought.
Steve?
Oh, yeah. And all my presentations for the next few weeks were, I will never, ever, and I then emphasized a third, ever hike again as long as I live. I really meant it as well, because I found it so debilitating, the whole thing. I lost all my toenails and so on. Weren't you physically beaten up?
Oh, yes. In fact, that's, if you're looking for a common starter on the trail, conversation starter, guy sits next to a gal, and common first question would be, so how many toenails have you lost? Yeah.
You're damn right.
I was running on empty. We were losing daylight. I'm a thin guy today, and I started the trail 165 pounds.
Wow.
I was down in the 140s.
Ooh.
So I was suffering, and I knew physically I had to be done. But in my head, this was a seminal experience. And there was this big, strong germ, not this little tiny germ, that says, someday I want to do this again, even though I hurt so bad.
Yeah. And how was it to hike together? Because I can't imagine it's the easiest thing to do with your spouse. Did you find it, and you were 30 years married, so you kind of knew each other pretty well by then, one would assume. Did you find it was, you drew together as a couple, or were there difficulties just, hiking with your spouse?
Yeah. One of the best things, one of our strong suits for my wife and I, and we're now 43 years married. I mean, I'm a blessed guy. One of our strong suits at the very start was working on some joint project together. We complement each other well. We see where one of the other ones maybe is a little weaker, and we just jump in without talking. So the PCT in some ways was just one of these biggest projects of all. And that's not to say that there weren't difficulties. Yeah. I pissed her off once, and she was so right. I mean, and she was so angry, and she had every right to be. And I apologize to you again, San, if you're listening.
Quite right, too. You will always apologize, by the way.
But in general, it brought us closer together. We still, to this day, we look at each other, and one will say, "We really did it. We hiked the Pacific Crest Trail." And it's as if we'd gone to the Smithsonian and we'd stole the Hope Diamond, and now we're secretly have it. This is the secret, this wonderful thing that the two of us share.
And it is a pretty damn wonderful thing.
Yeah.
It is. But you said you wanted to go again, but it was another 8 years. What happened in the intervening time? You were still working, I presume, were you?
So I worked the first half of that.
Right.
We still had one child at home. We had one daughter bounce back. She was still working, teaching high school biology. And I became a writer. I retired from law. Yes, folks, I was a lawyer, but we won't go there.
He seems a decent guy, though, doesn't he? Don't you think so, guys?
Yeah. Actually, yeah. I was a kind lawyer, but if we were on the trail, I'll unpack that one, not here. I was busy. I was president, board chair of the Pacific Crest Trail Association, all this stuff. And I had so much going on, even though I really wanted to do it again. What set me out there was 18 months before I started the AT, my wife, without telling me, started saying, "Hey, Scout's going to hike the AT in 2015.
Oh, excellent.
I'm sorry. Time out.
CDT.
Sorry. Scout's going to hike the CDT in 2015.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that was the choice was the CDT for what reason? Because it was a similar type hike, very much a wilderness hike. And were you doing it? I can tell from what she said, Scout's going to hike the CDT, not we're going to hike the CDT. Did she not want to go again?
What people do know, as I think you experience, is when they finish a hike, they usually know, do I have another through hike in me or do I not?
Sure.
Yeah, because it's so much a mental game. And
well, I thought I didn't, but I did apparently.
All right, good for you. When she came off, she didn't have another through hike in her. It wasn't her desire. I did. And so on the CDT, she only did, and we use the word only really strangely in this community, she only did 600 miles.
Slacker,
yeah. And the rest of the time she did support, she put 14,000 miles on this little borrowed mini motorhome thing, helping me and so many other hikers out there, because the CDT, there's no one on the CDT.
Yeah, that must be tough to get support on the CDT. She must have driven all over the place then. Man. She
did, and she'd come to Trailhead, and a hiker had been there with his thumb out for 2 hours, and he'd be so grateful to see her. And then, unlike the AT where you drive a mile, 5 miles to the nearest town, or a quarter mile, or the PCT where the distances are decent, 6, 7, 8 miles. On the CDT, you could drive 50 miles to the nearest little town to do your resupply.
Wow.
So it was a different thing.
Wow, that's something. So how different was that hike for you? Having gone as a couple previously, did you go as a single hiker or did you go with a buddy?
Single hiker.
Right. And how different, what's the kind of cost benefit analysis of that? Is that a better thing in different ways? And is it easier in other ways? And how did you find the difference between those two hikes?
Yeah. As your listeners probably know, 90% of people start a long trail through hike by themselves.
Yeah.
Even that's the most common question. People say, "Oh, so what group are you going with?" Because they obviously think we must be going with a group.
Yes, right. Yeah. I got asked a question today, funny enough. Yeah.
So in the CDT, she actually joined me for the first 80 miles. But after that, I would have days out there. I could go 2 days, hike 50 miles, and not see another human being.
Yeah.
I found that some of the most freeing experience I've had in my life. I love people. I like people.
Sure.
But when you're around people, you're always aware what your action do, what words you say. And now to hear what I do affects nobody.
Yes.
It only affects me. And the liberating feeling of that. What I also found was, I'm this so really, really alone in this god-awful, beautiful country. I found that I liked myself. And that's a nice thing to know.
Wow, that's an interesting realization. How did you realize that then? Did it take you a long time?
No,
despite being a lawyer.
I'm walking around one day thinking, I was a summer camp director at one time. And so I was running through, I said, I'd like to see how many of these old songs I can remember and do all the verses to. And so one morning I spent hours doing that. And I'm thinking, I'm having a fun time here all by myself.
That's nice. I'd imagine when I was thinking about the questions I would ask for this, I was wondering how different, having done it with your spouse and then do another similar type hike without your spouse, how different it would be. And then you decided to challenge yourself a little bit and wanted to give something a bit tougher than a normal AT through hike, didn't you? What did you do? This made me laugh when you told me this.
I did start my AT hike with a buddy, Rolling Thunder. And Rolling Thunder, like me, had done the two of the Triple Crown, the Pacific Crest Trail and Continental Divide Trail.
Nice.
And so he sent me an email a couple months before. He says, Scout, we've always started at an international border. So let's start at the Canadian-Maine border. Let's hike the extra 45 miles.
And so you approached Katahdin. Was it along the knife edge?
Yeah. We hope.
That's a fair old approach trail, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is. I got a photo of me, and it looks like I must be in Nepal, climbing Everest on this knife edge. And It was great. I was really glad that Rolling Thunder had serious climbing skills.
So you'd done 100 and something miles by then, 150 odd miles?
145.
That's a long approach trail, isn't it? Because you didn't actually start till you hit Katahdin, did you? So,
and in that first 145 miles, it's on the International Appalachian Trail. There is such a thing.
Yeah.
We saw two other hikers, and they had no idea they were on the International Appalachian Trail.
Oh, really?
So we get to Katahdin, and all of a sudden, there's 20 people on top of Katahdin.
Of course, yeah, of course. You lost your solitude there, I'm sure. And did you enjoy going south? And kind of what time of year was that you did it?
Hit the top of Katahdin on June 3rd.
Oh,
so
perfect.
we were in that first wave of southbounders.
Oh, good timing, actually. Then you worked that out really well. So how did the AT compare to your other trails? In fact, what difference did you find between those three trails? You must have a clear view of what they're like. I've got them in my mind, but I've only ever done the AT. So what was the difference for you as a hiker, having hiked all three, between all three trails?
Well, there was one day I actually wrote in my journal the differences between the PCT and the AT. I had this whole string of things. One is shelters. Give me a break. On the PCT, there's only one shelter that hikers will often use, not the 273 on the AT.
Wow.
And I'll admit, okay, sorry guys, I was a little bit, I had my nose in the air a little bit about shelters. Who needs shelters? I use a tent or a cowboy camp. I grew to really like shelters in the AT. Since I was southbounding, it wasn't unusual. I could have a shelter by myself since once I passed that the northbound wave, or just two or three of us in a shelter.
Was your buddy not with you by then, or had he left?
Rolling Thunder and I hiked the first 2 weeks together, and then he got a little bit hurt, and I hiked on ahead. He did finish though. Rolling Thunder did.
Okay. So you did the three, which is fantastic, and I admire anybody who's done all three of those, because the thought of doing them all three would just blow my mind. But then something you've become really known for is that you invite hikers into your home, and you do it on an almost industrial scale, don't you? So tell us how that started and why it's important to you and your wife.
We don't use the term usually industrial scale, but we like. Well,
you knew what I meant, though, didn't you?
Oh, I do, because the term we like to use is we have to plan for this like a marine beach invasion.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Nice.
So my wife and I were often called trail angels on the PCT. And then on the AT, where you have this wonderful network of hostels up and down the trail.
Sure.
Every little town has a hostel. They don't charge that much, $25, and someone's passionate. That's what they've done. There's no hostel on the PCT. And our numbers used to be a 10th or a 15th of the through hiking numbers. So you couldn't run a business.
Sure.
So what you had was this network of 3 or 4 along 2,600 miles of a trail angels homes. And my wife, Frodo's her trail name, so in this context, I call her Frodo, not Sandy.
Yes.
Frodo and I in 2006, the year before we hiked, we said, we're so enthused already, but wouldn't it be neat to have starting through hikers in our house? And we'll feed them, we'll pick them up, help them do their errands, and then they'll stay a night or two, and we'll drive them out the trailhead. And unlike a Springer Mountain, where the approach is fairly easy to start walking,
sure.
San Diego, trailhead's 60 miles inland.
Wow.
It's difficult to get to, middle of nowhere. If you're relying on public transportation, it takes more than a half day. It doesn't drop you off there. There's no signage, and you end up camping maybe by the youth detention center.
Sounds like they don't want you going out there, doesn't it, really?
Yeah. So for us to offer that, we did. In 2006, 17 hikers stayed with us for 8 weeks. We're still in touch with more than half of them.
Nice.
And we thought, this is fun. So our year, 2007, we're planning for our own through hike. She's writing 11 weeks of lesson plans. I'm turning over the keys to log practice to the younger partners. And we had 35 of our class stay with us over the 4 or 5 weeks beforehand. And it was fun.
Wow.
And this, back then, it was easy then. Please, we don't want any gifts, no donations. We do this because we can. We got empty bedrooms in the house, big backyard. 2008, when we do it again, word had gotten out. So more than a third of that year's starting PCT hikers stayed at our house, over 100 people. So, Steve, a year ago, 2019, over 3,000 hikers started the Pacific Crest Trail with the intent through hike. Over 8 weeks, we had 1,200 of them sleep at our house.
As I said to you, this is an industrial scale effort.
It is.
So what is it like? What's your house like when the people come there? Are they all excited because they're all about to start their hike, aren't they? It must be awesome for you.
They are excited out of their gourds. If you could channel the excitement at our house, with power or generator, you could light up the whole neighborhood. They're excited. They're scared. Yeah. They are uncertain. We like them to feel when they come here as if they're getting a big hug. So we have 3 huge catering tents in the backyard. Big Agnes donated 3 of their 6-person tents. We have a tree house with a loft with a queen-size mattress that people can sleep in. There's a tent trailer that 3 or 4 can sleep in the front yard. And there's of the 5 bedrooms, we have 3 bedrooms for hikers they sleep in. So to sleep 40 a night is actually is not only doable. We once slept 65 here.
Oh my gosh! But the good thing, the difference is you don't have all the hostels do have. They're all clean, aren't they? When they come to you, they don't stink.
They're not just clean, but they don't have their hiker hunger. So when we're feeding 45 for dinner, it's a lot of food, but not. And it's a whole production. We awesome. About 3 o'clock, Frodo and I trade off. I like cooking too, and we'll trade off each one. We'll do a dinner, and I'll get 5 or 6 hikers come in. I have 4 or 5 stations already set up with to take this whole pile of this and turn it into a nice salad.
Yeah, nice.
And we have this fun time. I have chef hats we put on. Every night we do a after dinner talk, and my voice just grew serious because we realized early on that with 1/3 of that year's hikers passing through our house, we have a chance to positively affect hiker behavior. And we tell some fun stories, but we talk about leave no trace.
Yeah, sure.
We had 3 years ago, we had 2 hikers die who stayed with us, 2 strong, independent young women who, in a high snow year in Sierra, at a difficult stream crossing, they didn't make it. Their bodies were found weeks later below stream crossing.
Oh my gosh.
So I make myself tell that story every night, and then we talk about what you should do at a stream crossing. And we remind them the words that Frodo would say to me on the CDT when she dropped me off at the trailhead. She wouldn't say, "I love you." Those weren't her last words. Her last words to me were, "Make wise decisions."
And I'm sure you say that to the kids as well. It's normally kids, I suppose. Make wise decisions. You could tell every child that, every adult that, I should think as well. Yeah. Make wise decisions. So you do that, and I think that is a wonderful thing you've given back to the trail. But you've done more than that. You also served, and you mentioned the PCTA in several capacities on the trail and environmental organisations, haven't you?
Yeah.
Are we in a good place now? Are the trails in good places? Is this a strong system within our country right now?
So largely, and this will sound surprising, largely in our country, protection, federal, state, local, and especially the supporting nonprofits, we are in a pretty good place.
Good.
We actually have some people regard surprising nonpartisan support. In fact, when you and I we're recording this today on a Tuesday, and tomorrow the House is going to take up the Great American Outdoors Act, the most significant piece of trail and conservation legislation in years. I'm president of the Partnership for the National Trail System. We've had a considerable hand in it. It makes me really proud. The Senate, remember, the Senate is strongly controlled by a particular party. The Senate passed it with over 70 votes in favor.
Wow.
And the House is
nothing
going to pass it
passes with 70 votes.
and get this, all you listening out there, President Trump tweeted that he's in favor and he will sign it.
Fantastic.
So
that is good news then. So what does that effectively do then?
It is going to double the amount of federal and state funds to purchase land to fill in the gaps in our trails and our recreation system and for conservation.
Right.
It's effectively doubling the funding for the Land Water Conservation Fund. And the other real big piece it's going to do, because we all hear about the backlog of deferred maintenance. Oh my gosh, sure. Our national parks, this needs repaired and so forth and so on. The same is true on our national forests and on BLM land. And that bill has big real dollars for the next 5 years to tackle all that deferred maintenance, national parks, national forests, and Bureau of Land Management land. This is great.
That is great news. Let's hope it gets a quick passing. And now I want to talk about your book. And your book's Journeys North. It's been released in August, and we're recording in July. We're not going to put this out until it's actually released, so I want to make sure people can get it. But this wasn't intended to be your first book, was it? Tell us about the great American novel that you were going to write.
So I'm 68 today. I'm 28.
Oh, happy birthday.
Oh, no, not today. I mean, generally this year.
Right. Okay. Generally. You're generally 68, yeah.
Yeah. I'm in my late 20s, and I've just finished being camp director, and now I'm starting being a lawyer. And I get bit one day hard. I'm going to write the next great American novel. I mean, to be in your 20s, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Anytime.
And for 3 years, I worked real hard at it. Finished one book. Actually had interest in New York. You get the letter back. People would write letters, not send you an email. They would write letter back that we loved your book, but it doesn't fit our list. Please send us your next. And these two women from a large house, it's still large today, Viking Penguin, wrote back a 2-page single-space letter, all the changes that he wanted to make.
Oh, interesting.
And I was 28 years old, and I said to myself, I'm not going to do that. I was an idiot. But then we started having kids.
All right, there you go.
we were living like paupers because I'd hung up my law degree. My wife was a graduate student working on her PhD, and it was time to move on. Yeah. And I did for 30 years.
And now you've moved on. You've now publishing this book, and unlike for nearly every memoir of a through hike, it's about that individual person's journey. But yours is really unusual. I've not found another one actually that does it. You came up with the idea, and I understand you kept a journal on the way, but you must have formed this idea as part of your journey, because you're telling the story not just of you, but you're telling the story of other people as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an integral part of your book, aren't you?
It's not just integral, it's the core. This book is about 6 of us.
Exactly, yeah.
It's about 6 of us. It's about my wife and I, and then 2 much younger couples or pairs we hoped would get together, and then if they did, stay together.
All right.
And on the trail, these other 4 told me their stories. We lived with them, and some of the searing reasons why they were out there, and then what happened to them out there. And I came off the trail thinking, this is what I want to write about. This is what I want to share. These stories should be told. And that they have to this day trusted me to do so. Blazer, Dalton, Tony, and Nadine still amazes me.
Well, yeah, and that's what I really want to ask you. How receptive are people to having, I guess, the visceral nature of their lives on the trail written about? I mean, this is it's just harsh for a lot of people, isn't it? And it tests people in a way in which you wouldn't necessarily expect to be tested. And there's you, an observer, writing about them. How have they coped with that?
That's a real good question. And I actually, when I came off the trail, and the first year that I began really working hard on the book, I actually answered it for them. I answered in my head. They don't want me to write about them.
Yes.
And so what I did, I had started to format the book as you would a historical fiction book. So the background in a historical fiction book is everything's real in the background, but in the foreground, you have a couple of fictional characters, and they embody what someone would have lived like in the time. And I'd already begun to fashion a couple foreground characters.
Oh, right.
That evoke the same spirit and the same degree of difficult stories, both before and on the trail. And then my dear wife said to me one day, she said, "Scout, you need to ask Blazer. You've made an assumption. You need to ask her if she really wouldn't want you to write about you."
Sure. And
I can recall that day I did. It was colder than snot. We were in Washington, D.C., walking on a sidewalk, 2:15 in the afternoon. And I turned to her. She knew I was working on the book. She was 26 years old at the time. And I said, "Blazer, you wouldn't want me to write about you, would you?"
This is brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm expecting a negative answer,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
And she looks me in the eye and says, "Scout, I trust you. It would be okay."
Wow. So you wrote about it. You wrote about her and the others. Did you give them any veto power? Did you allow them to see the book before it's published and for them to say, "Oh, I'm not sure about that"? How did that work out?
All right. So after Blazer gave the answer, we then sat down and spent the next 45 minutes talking about what that really means.
Right.
Because if I write about someone, if I were to write about you, Steve, I would tell you the same thing I told Blazer, that I write with compassion and care, but nothing can be off the table. You can't tell me 18 months from now, "Oh, Scout, this one piece you can't touch on," or 2 years from now. That just can't be. So let's examine this now, and let's make a decision now. And there was nothing off the table.
So did they read it before it was published, though? Or it's not quite published yet. It's been published in August, I know.
The 6 main characters, I think all of them have read earlier versions. And I'll share with one thing about Blazer. One particular devastating incident of her teenage years. After her mother and her doctor, I was the next one to know. Uh-huh. And because it was written in the book, one of the next people she's closest to in her life, which is her older brother,
sure.
Who's also in the book, only 2 weeks ago did she tell him about this, and because the book was out. And she said, "Scout, it was so good to finally talk to my brother about it. And he was so understanding and so loving. And it felt so good to tell him."
How interesting is that? I can't imagine, because the way in which I spill my guts over everything I've done in my life, nobody would want me to write about them. So they must really have trusted you, man. They really must have done. So I admire you for having that trust from somebody else to write about them.
It is. And, I've been a leader in trail organizations. I was a scoutmaster.
Sure.
One thing I feel very strong about as leader is you never do anything, you never ask anyone else to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. And so in this book, you'll find, those you read, you'll see I too, that for myself and my wife, we have shared our deepest stories.
Okay. Well, I'm so pleased that we got the chance to do this, and I hope the book goes well. It sounds like it will do. So where can people find you and your book? Because by the time this comes out, and I won't put it out before it actually is released. So where can they find you and the book?
I got 2 answers to that.
Right.
First of all, you will find it where you most want to buy books. It's at most all independent bookstores on the web.
Sure.
You go to Indie Book, and they'll find their books for you. But my other answer is Amazon. And why? New books are fragile. Today, it sits there and it's got a #1 new release on it. But in the early weeks when this is going to go out, that's what will help boost the book. So I make both requests. Buy it where you're most comfortable, and buy it on Amazon. And folks, post a review if you do. really, really helps.
Okay, man. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on the show. And I wish you well with the book. I will be reading it, and I look forward to seeing how it goes.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a real pleasure visiting with you this morning.
Take it easy. Bye. What a terrific storyteller he is. I've started reading his book. I think you're going to enjoy it. It certainly sounds like a winner, doesn't it? And how about giving up your home for hundreds of hikers every year? You've got to be a special couple, and Barney and his wife are clearly that. One last thing I loved about Barney and his wife, their last words to each other are, make wise decisions. Excellent advice in hiking and in life. Now a bit of news. Since I got involved in hiking and podcasting in particular, I've struggled with various websites that may or may not have been visited from time to time. Eventually I ended up with hikingradionetwork.com alongside Mighty Blue on the AT.com. Well, with the three main shows, plus RTK's and Dixie's shows a couple of years ago, and JR's attempt on the AT this year, hikingradionetwork.com never really fulfilled its proper function. Well, now I've taken the Hiking Radio Network site away from WordPress and parked it as a brand new site, which is our network site. And each of our shows have their own site within the network site. So you go to hikingradionetwork.com and you'll come to the main page. Now, you could click on the latest episode button and you'll go to whichever is the latest show within the network to be released. If you're looking for a particular show, though, scroll down and you're going to find each one of them there. Click on the show you want and you'll be at that show's site. There, you're going to find all the show notes, all the links, all the pictures, and the platforms you can subscribe to the show through. So if you want to subscribe through Apple, you click that button, or Spotify, you click the Spotify button. There's also a donate button that is far more easily found than it was before. Try it out. Just go to hikingradionetwork.com and we'll see you there. Now, let's hear from Mr. President, or Bill Tichner. Well, with Bounce not with us this week, we've got Bill Tichner, or Mr. President, as he is otherwise known. Hey, Bill, how are you?
I'm good, Blue. How are you?
Well, I'm very good, but I'm kind of wondering why you're Mr. President. What's that all about?
Well, I actually got the trail name 6 years ago when I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. On the trail about 200 miles in, I was hiking with a guy named Happy Pants, a guy from France.
Nice name.
Oh yeah. Well, he had happy faces sewn into his pants. It was very, very fetching.
Excellent.
So we were hiking up to a very famous food cache, which is basically a dumpster full of, literally an actual garbage dumpster full of food and sodas.
Nice.
Next to a couch in the forest.
Right.
And there were these two girls eating some food near the dumpster, singing that tune, Happy Birthday, Mr. President, to the tune of like Marilyn Monroe. And yeah, they finish and one girl says to the other, that would make a really good trail name for somebody. Now, Happy Pants, who is from France, he says, he points at me and says, his name is Bill, like Bill Clinton, and he doesn't have a trail name yet. We should call him Mr. President. And literally this girl looks at me and she says, well, what kind of leadership experience do you have? And I said, 15 years ago, I was president of my student government. And she said, well, what school did you go to? It kind of matters. And so I was like kind of taken aback of being vetted at this point. But I told her I went to the University of Vermont, and that's where she actually had gone to school herself. And a couple other folks who were also there eating had gone there too. So they voted, and I became Mr. President. It was very democratic.
There you go. But since the Pacific Crest Trail, you've done a few more things, and I know Bounce introduced you the other day, but we haven't spoken obviously in recording. So this is the second leg of a long distance journey you're on anyway, isn't it? So where did you start this particular walk?
So I actually started in the fall, and that's because I had hiked the Continental Divide Trail
last year.
Yeah, last year. Yep. I'd actually hiked the Continental Divide Trail last year in the spring and summer, and finished mid-September. And I finished early enough that I thought, why don't I start? I always planned on hiking the Appalachian Trail in 2020, but I thought, why not take advantage of the nice fall weather in 2019 and start my AT hike? Yeah. So I traveled cross country and I drove my little Prius to Springer Mountain. I dropped off little resupply packages from Springer all the way up to Damascus, Virginia, and then I hiked south. So I did the first 500 miles of the AT last fall, and then I was going to get back on in Virginia, in Damascus, in April, but COVID happened, and my flight was canceled. And so I sat and waited and kind of read all the updates from the Appalachian Trail Commission. I waited until they, there was always kind of seemingly vague guidance from them around whether or not you should be on trail.
I think vague is correct, actually. It's a good word for it.
Yeah. Well, I saw the messaging go from please don't be on trail to, be self-sufficient. And so I waited till they opened Katahdin in Baxter State Park. And I got myself up to Katahdin on the first day they opened, July 1st. Nice. And I've been hiking south ever since.
And you're at the top of Killington. You're at the top of Killington now, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, I should say I was, and I hiked back down to get cell service.
Oh, right. So how's it been? Because you hadn't hiked for some time then, I presume. So your first journey was up Katahdin. I mean, that since you haven't hiked for some time, that's a tough old start, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think most SOBOs learn that lesson pretty quickly. So, and Katahdin, yeah, it's quite a hike. But you know what I will say is that as difficult as Katahdin is, it's so much fun because the approach to the mountain is pretty gentle, and then once you're climbing up the famous rock pile that goes to the top, sure. It's kind of like bouldering, and you're kind of like route finding, and it's a lot of fun, actually. I didn't feel as hard as other climbs I've done. So let me recap that. So you did the CDT pretty quickly, which was pretty amazing, which is great anyway. You then went across to Springer Mountain, and you say you cached packages. Or did you just take them to? Where do you take these resupply packages? For every hike that I go on, I make a little spreadsheet with places I plan to stop. And right. I do research using gut hooks and Google Maps to see which kind of places I can stay at. And I try to stay at hostels. So luckily, as you probably know, there's a lot of hostels in the southern part of the Appalachian Trail. So I picked a bunch of hostels from Springer all the way up to Damascus. Right. And I literally had some extra supplies for my Continental Divide hike. So I made little shopping bags full of supplies. And instead of mailing them, I just drove cross country and literally drove to the hostels and asked them if they could hang on my bag till I came back.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what was the reaction? Was your reaction uniformly positive from people?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that oftentimes these hostels will get packages that are never picked up, sure. And so it's nice to meet someone face to face who says, I'll be back for this.
Right. So you started going south, what date last year then? From Damascus?
It was right around October 15th or so.
Right. And how was that, getting down to Georgia? It must have been getting pretty cool by the time you got there, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I love the fall. It's a lot drier. And I actually joined kind of a bubble of southbounders. Nice. Kind of the front end of the southbounders. And
sure.
I was pleasantly surprised. I wasn't really sure if there'd be a difference in the type of people who hike the AT versus the CDT or the PCT. Right. But I met just great people. They were super stoked to be on the trail. They were as dedicated as anyone else I'd met hiking, and a lot of fun to hike with. So, it was great. And the weather was great. And going to the Smoky Mountains in the fall is kind of unbeatable. The red and orange leaves and the wispy clouds.
I bet it is. Yeah, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. I think it's the way to do it, to be honest.
Now, let me think about this then. So the ATC have said they're not going to recognise 2020 hikes, but you all started in 2019 and you waited until Katahdin was open. So not that we do this or anybody does this for a certificate, but it's pretty damn nice to get a certificate, I tell you, with your name and the year on it. Are you still going to apply for a certificate? I wonder whether they're going to give it to you.
I'll apply.
They should do, shouldn't they?
Will they give it to me? I don't know. I mean, I know they recommend splitting your hike, up like this. Oftentimes,
Well, you've done everything you've been told.
For me,
you've done everything you should. Has been suggested, which is a good thing. Yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah. So, how are you enjoying it? Is this been fun doing New Hampshire and Maine?
I've loved it. I have absolutely loved it. And I will tell you, again, I really wasn't sure what it was going to be like. I went from thinking that this was the worst year to do the AT to thinking, you know what, this is kind of a great year because, you know, everyone on trail is just hiking with intent and purpose. And there's still enough people on trail that you get a social experience. I actually started hiking with a bunch of folks. We're a little spread out now. The whites tend to spread groups apart, as you can imagine. Yeah. But we call ourselves the Fellowship of the Chocolate-Filled Marshmallows.
Oh, dear me.
My sister sends me my resupply packages, and she sent me this package of chocolate-filled marshmallows.
Nice.
So one night we roasted them over a fire pit at one of the shelters. We thought they'd be terrible because they were not typical marshmallows, but they were delicious. And anyway, so we were bound together by these delicious snacks. But some of the group is ahead of me, some is behind me. But either way, it's been great to kind of hike with people and push through these challenging parts of the Appalachian Trail. Like the whites get a lot of credit for being the difficult part of the trail. But Maine is no joke. Maine is very difficult hiking.
Maine is extraordinarily and if people think when they get through New Hampshire, it's all right now, it's downhill to Katahdin. It really isn't. It is tough as all that up.
Yeah.
But now I know that Bounce sort of referred to this also, that you're doing something of a project as well while you're on this trip. What's that all about?
Yeah. It's interesting. I primarily I'm here to hike, but before my hike started, I was in quarantine, and a friend of mine named Pathfinder, he's one of the people who has hiked the Continental Divide, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Appalachian Trail within a 12-month period.
Yeah, crazy. Absolutely crazy.
And yeah, it's just, I don't know how they do it. I that's not my kind of style. That's too much for me, but I give him a lot of props.
Sure.
He had been hiking along with a guy named Prodigy, who is a calendar year triple crowner. So he did the same thing, but within a calendar year.
Tyler, he's been on the show, yeah.
Yeah, he mentioned that. Cool. He actually, I think, said that you were one of the first people that ever had him on a podcast. So that's pretty cool.
Cool.
And so I had learned the story that when Pathfinder, who had been hiking along with Prodigy on that epic hike of theirs, they discovered, I think Pathfinder, who's a white heterosexual cisgender male, and Prodigy, who is of, I believe, he's of Asian descent, but he's a United States citizen. They've been hiking in Montana and trying to kind of get, I believe, away from a wildfire. And Pathfinder had said to Prodigy, "Hey, let's hop this fence so we can get into town quicker." And Prodigy said, "No, we can't hop that fence. We could get shot. It says, trespassers shot on sight." And Pathfinder said, "I'll do the talking if we see a rancher." And I think from that experience, both of, Pathfinder realized that they were hiking the same trail and going for the same kind of feat, but they were having a very different experience on that trail. And it kind of highlights the need for this project that you're alluding to here. I've been working with Pathfinder and Prodigy and a group of hikers, long distance hikers, on a project to try to address the fact that there are less minoritized hikers on trail, hikers of color, especially. So we're kind of putting together a project where we're trying to put together a scholarship to help get more hikers of color on trail.
Cool.
In the upcoming years. Yeah.
Cool.
So
cool.
It's pretty exciting. And I can't speak for the whole project. I'm just one person on the group. But
that is a very, very laudable thing. I'm not going to. The problem is when you get into politics anywhere, it lends to polarized views, and we don't need to do any of that. I just think it's a good thing that you're going to give back to the trail and get people on the trail who might not otherwise be there. Black, white, yellow, pink, or blue, doesn't really matter who they are, and I think that's I think that's a great effort as well. So when do you expect to get to Damascus, and that will be your finish, I presume?
Yeah. So I think at the latest it'd be early November, but more than likely, my goal is to get there by probably the first week of October. Right. Is what I'm shooting for. And I think that's very doable since I've gotten through the toughest parts. Yeah.
How many miles have you got to go then? I'm just trying to think. Where are you? You're about miles 1,600, something like that?
Let's see.
Going north, sorry.
No,
I've got the wrong way around.
Yeah.
You're probably about mile 600, aren't you?
I've done about 1,000 miles total so far. So the first 500 miles from the south and the first 500 miles from the north.
Right. Okay.
So,
all right.
I've got the middle section, about
Right.
1,200 miles, I guess, left.
Yeah, no, you'll enjoy that as well.
Yeah.
It's going to be great as well. Look, but we're going to try to follow you along the trail. Now, I know you've got probably the least effective phone on the entire Appalachian Trail. You told me this, but this sounds great.
True.
Yeah, this sounds great. But while we can, we're going to try to catch up with you and just see the progress you make. So it's been great to introduce you to everybody, and hopefully we'll speak to you again for next week's show as well. All right.
That sounds great, Blue.
Appreciate it. Bye.
All right, take care.
So we should have Bill for several weeks as he makes his way to Damascus. I wonder, will the ATC give him his due? I really hope so. The second new bit of the show is something I've been meaning to do for a while. My lovely donors to the show have just stepped up over the past year, and while I've been able to correspond with some of them, I wanted to thank them publicly today and every week going forward. I'll be thanking those who've donated. So, in no particular order, and it's a long list, it's thanks to the following that I'm talking to you all right now. Randy Accra, Mike DiCello, Dan Dusterbeck, Central Texas Spiritware, Daniel Morris, Randy Kaiser, Annette Kramer, Alan Hegner, Teresa Sitko, Daniel Manning, Dr. Lynn Savino, Tarka Sullivan, Carl Lemons, Paul Maguire, Mark Carbonneau, Greg Joyce, Cliff Bates, Barry Sutton, Jason Woods, Hugh Ickrath, Connor Mulligan, Seasoned Systems, Wayne Campbell, Nicolaus Roricha, Manda Aguilard, Terry Stewart, Marcy Ladd, Lisa Rana, Jay Fry, Elizabeth Parson, Alicia Brimbury, Michelle Brown, Thomas Weaver, Stuart Jones, Dana Livesey, Dave Fleischman, Basluca Francine, Robert Jones, Arthur Gross, David Collins, Clay Bonneman Evans, John Van Etten, Martha Sturtevant, Michael Garsh, Brian Bell, Jane Helwig, John Rowley, Jonathan Harris, Ben Hall, Lars Norling, Michael Bauer, Ronnie Jacobson, Andrew Haverstick, G.A. Donovan, Ronald Starnes, David Grimm, Connie Nestor, Stephen Ortiz, Calvin Gooch Jr., Don Robinson, Jack Shiner, John Dobbs, Timothy Goss, Crystal Glynn, Trip Clark, Eugene Martell, Molly McCarthy, Lars Hubbard, John Krautler, Daniel Long, G-Bolt on the Trail, Ninka De Haas, Kevin Johnson, and a guy I only know as Barry who sent me a check. And in the last week, we've had donations from Vicky Thomason, Todd Withrow, and John Duprat. Now, several people in that list give monthly, and some have given more than once. I don't think I missed anybody out, but, you know, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Even going through this list has enabled me to see how much the show is reaching people and how much you're really enjoying it. And these donations, along with sponsors, keep me going, and I hope that you all feel good about that. Before I get a bit too emotional, let's move on. Fozzie is at Amicalola Falls, ready to go and constantly establishing that he is not only a Brit, but that he's English. I totally feel your pain, Fozzie. I'll see you next week. Chapter 3. Preview Sitting. March the 28th to April the 1st, miles 0 to 51. I have few expectations for the world. A compulsory prison sentence seems fair for those annoying individuals who relay their life story to the cashier whilst we queue behind. Secondly, it's obvious that The Great Escape, a 1963 movie starring Steve McQueen, should have its own dedicated TV channel to play permanently forever. Finally, coffee is our saviour and should be accessible, mandatory and free for everyone. This is my global vision, and with it in mind, I helped myself to a cup of joe inside the Amicalola Falls Visitor Centre. Whilst filling in the hiker registry form, a man emerged from the office. "A group from London started 3 weeks ago. You're British, right?" he inquired, after noticing my passport. "Yes, English to be exact," I replied politely. He looked confused. "There's a difference?" "Well, England is part of Great Britain, and I'm British, but patriotic enough to consider myself English. If the politicians have their way, I'll be European soon. I'm just trying to save my nationality." He still appeared puzzled, but smiled and wished me a good hike. I circled the room, checking information, scanning maps and studying a stuffed snake, or so I thought, my nose pressed against the glass tank. The exhibit moved, and I fell backwards in surprise. I checked that Swiss Miss, who'd given me a ride to the centre, hadn't played witness along with anyone else, and I left to save further loss of face. Nice one, Fozzie. You haven't even made the approach trail yet, let alone the actual AT, and you've already encountered a snake and bloody fallen over. Impressive start, mate. Way to go. Swiss Miss took my camera and suggested I stand by the AT sign. Appalachian Trail approach, Springer Mountain, Georgia, 8.5 miles. Mount Cotard, Maine, 2,108.5 miles. She captured the second most important photo of the trip, gave me a hug, a kiss on the cheek, and wished me luck. I'm not an avid planner, so my hiking strategy was loose except for one aspect: begin slowly. I wanted to avoid blisters, which had plagued me on El Camino and the PCT. I figured a slower than average pace, regular breaks and short distances for 2 weeks would be key. I'd have to rein in my over-enthusiasm, but the mileage deficit would reverse later. I left the visitor centre and took my first steps north. My environment calmed to the quiet, sedative charms of late winter. A sandy trail coiled away, scattered with crisp umber leaves, and the woods were silent. I peeled off my jacket as I warmed. Amicalola Creek curved over, offering a hushed gurgle which preserved the stillness. The Cherokee had named the 729 feet high Amicalola Falls, meaning tumbling waters. An impressive 604-stepped wooden staircase zigzagged to the top of them. Overweight tourists in various states of decay littered the climb. Some grasped the handrail, bent over catching their breath. Others sat gulping the last of their sodas. I felt good, having spent 2 months getting into shape with our long runs and 15-mile weekend walks. I breathed easy and sped up all 729 feet like a sprightly teenager. Springer Mountain was only 8.5 miles from the visitor centre, but took longer than expected. An eagerness to sit by one of the most renowned hiking spots in the world gripped me as I increased my pace. The climb mellowed and flattened into a clearing. Round-topped, tree-cloaked hills faded to the northern horizon. I set my pack against a rock embellished with a bronze plaque. A figure of a hiker stood proud, and I ran my hands along the surface, rippling my fingers over the raised letters. Appalachian Trail, Georgia to Maine. A footpath for those who seek fellowship with the wilderness. 1890-34, the Georgia Appalachian Trail Club. I smiled. They cast it for me and every hiker. Significant words returned my gaze. A footpath for those who seek fellowship with the wilderness. Just one profound line. I did seek fellowship with the wilderness. I wanted to learn and be part of it again, to banish my negative emotions from 2 years spent in society since the PCT. The moment I dreamed of had arrived, my saviour. Content at last, I had several months following a classic trail through prime American countryside. Free to roam with no schedules, no alarm calls, with other like-minded people to share the experience. I'd escaped from society, a freed prisoner, and the relief overwhelmed me. I sat, cupped my face in my hands, gave into emotions, and unashamed, I cried. Hearing voices, I wrote a passage in the trail register and left. I passed Springer Mountain Shelter, but felt no need to rest so early. I had a guidebook, but no topographical map. The AT was so well marked that many hiked without one. The AT guide, written by a thru hiker called David AWOL Miller, supplied the information I needed. It detailed mileage completed and remaining, altitude graphs, distances to the next waypoint, water sources, other trails and notable features. The town maps were indispensable. The trail markers, known as blazes, provided further clarification. The size of a dollar bill, they dotted the AT. Painted on trees, rocks, fences or other mediums, they signified the right track. Dinosaur claimed they were so frequent that the next blaze should be visible from the preceding one. These simple white rectangles led to Maine. I couldn't get lost. They were marked southbound as well for the SOBOs. Other trails, such as those to shelters and water sources, were blue. The trail narrowed through tunnels of rhododendron bushes, a green desert island in the starkness of late winter. Soon they'd erupt in splashes of pink blooms. I jumped over narrow creeks or used stepping stones over the wider waters. I saw my first thru hiker ahead. Simple clues like his larger pack and short hair suggested he could be Maine-bound. Some thru hikers shaved their heads at the start. I slowed. His gait and stride differed from normal. He trod with care, concentrating on each step and foot placement. One arm rose to steady him, as though balancing on a tightrope. I spoke so as not to startle him. "You walk carefully. It's interesting to watch. What's your name?" PJ. And yours? Fuzzy. Nice to meet you. He noticed my accent. Are you British? Oh crap, here we go again. I slowed, intended to stop, but didn't want to explain twice in one day, so I offered the simplified version. Yes, English to be exact. See you later, I expect. For sure, it's all good. After 12 miles and already late afternoon, a blue blaze marked the side trail to Stover Creek. Eager to experience my first shelter, I took the turn. I intended using the shelters infrequently, so I'd packed camping equipment. I'd heard much about these simple, three-sided refuges dotting the trail. A focal point for hikers at day's end, they offered a haven from the elements and company. Some had a fire pit, privy and picnic tables. With no plumbed water, electric or heating, though a handful had fireplaces, they were purely sanctuaries from inclement weather. They also helped minimise environmental impact by limiting foot traffic to one area. Occupied on a first-come, first-served basis, they often filled by mid-afternoon. Our guidebooks stated their capacity, but limits were exceeded, especially in wet conditions. I sleep poorly in confined spaces, especially with several others. Snoring, passing wind, fidgeting and conversations didn't help either. Once familiar with shelter etiquette, we were considerate, but I still struggled to rest and preferred my tent. And humans weren't the only occupants. Mice favoured them too. Our rodent friends also liked refuge and food. Several lengths of cordage, around a foot long, hung from most shelter entrances with a horizontal stick tied at the bottom. An empty tin can dangled halfway, held by a knot. Mice couldn't negotiate this obstacle, so our packs and food, suspended on the stick by the carrying loop, stayed safe. My food supplies didn't bother me. I might find a nibbled pack of crackers or a ruined loaf of bread. The potential damage to belongings worried me, as hikers often discovered holes in their gear. Equipment wasn't cheap, so you can imagine my concern. I stayed in the quieter shelters, becoming fond of the mice. At sundown, scurrying sounds echoed around. They checked the menu, carried out route surveillance, and held planning meetings to discuss the best line of attack. I didn't mind. They really bothered me. They're like us, just trying to survive. I often honed in on a shelter come day's end. They were marvellous places to socialise when I needed to, see friends, swap food, get a weather report from whoever had cell phone reception, and sit by anyone with dark chocolate with an expectant, hungry smile. Come sundown, I retired to my tent. Stover Creek was impressive. Split into 2 levels with a capacity of 10, it could have slept double that. 12 other hikers wrote their journals, cooked, made their beds or socialised. I chatted with Eric, Bridget and Josh before finding a flat spot to camp. The following morning, keen to put in a good shift and finish early, I left at 6:30 a.m. After a short-lived chill, I wore shorts and a t-shirt in the warmth. Waking up, Spring had overslept and realised there was much work needed. However, I didn't become complacent about the weather. I remember the AT's reputation for changeable conditions and, apart from the rain, at higher elevations it could be erratic. The Smoky Mountains, 165 miles in, were notorious for late snowfall. I wasn't complaining. I relished being out of the English cold and enjoyed the premature warmth. I stopped and chatted with 2 forestry workers. Their eagerness to talk about their home state of Georgia was clear. They pointed out the trillium plant with its 3 virgin white petals, and mayapple, sporting a simple, more delicate single flower head. I asked after ramps, wild onions, which I'd read about in David Brill's excellent AT memoir, As Far as the Eye Can See, but it was too early. Food played on my mind and ramps held much potential. They were free, fresh, abundant and tasty. I couldn't wait. I passed Eric sitting by Blackwell Creek collecting water for camp. "Hey Fuzzy, the shelter's close. You staying there tonight?" "Is anyone there yet?" I asked. "Yeah, most from yesterday." "Sounds good," I added. "See you there." Gooch Mountain Shelter signalled 13 miles for the day, matching the low target I'd set, so I took the side trail and found a suitable spot for camping. Bridget, Eric, Josh and another Josh had arrived along with PJ, who was in a jovial mood. Noticing the 2 Joshes and the potential confusion, I suggested we offer them trail names. Josh Longhair and Josh Shorthair wasn't original, but solved the immediate problem. Many still use their proper names, which surprised me as on the PCT most hikers already had trail names. However, on the AT customs weren't yet familiar. We discussed it that evening in the shelter and agreed to give it more thought. PJ and Bridget intrigued me. Character traits suggest how focused on the adventure people are. From their hiking style, either lazy or purposeful, whether they chat with excitement or an air of nonchalance, or their organisation at camp, slapdash or orderly, these indications held clues. Indeed, I wondered how others perceived me. Bridget was a classic example. She was 24 and hailed from Madison, Wisconsin. She'd been making noises about hiking the AT for years, and after a period in the AmeriCorps, she'd travelled in South America and returned in December. She worked as a special education assistant and with spring looming decided career advancement wasn't top of her list. However, spiritual progression was, and the AT offered the ideal place to mature it, to nurture it. She wore a grey T-shirt with Madison emblazoned across the front and tied her hair with a pink band. Appearing younger than her years suggested, she giggled often and was relaxed but also focused. A month's trial hike wasn't on her agenda. From her purposeful hiking, approach to camp tasks and our positive conversations, I never doubted she'd make it to Katahdin. PJ had the shortest trail name I'd ever encountered. He was 22, fresh-faced, bright-eyed and smiled full time. He demanded hugs from day one, leaving me in no doubt that when I bumped into him, a simple hi wouldn't cut it. His character was infectious and brightened many situations. Confiding in me, he'd revealed he'd left his wife and how difficult it was. As he explained, remorse and sadness tainted his expression, and he stared into space. Returning to the present, he smiled and offered his usual catchphrase, "It's all good." After dinner, I hung my food bag on the nearby bear cables. 2 new faces, Krista and her mother, arrived. Many shelters had bear cables close by. The theory was simple. Pack smelly items into a waterproof bag and hang it. Cables stretched between 2 trees, high up and far enough from the tree to be out of a bear's reach. Apart from keeping our supplies safe and away from sleeping areas, it also educated our furry friends. Bears are intelligent, prioritising 3 primary instincts: survival, food and procreation. Over time, they've learned to associate humans with eating opportunities. Hanging supplies teaches them that just because people are nearby doesn't mean there are snacks as well. Black bears are common on the AT, but reclusive. They go about their business without bothering us. If you see one, the best deterrent is making your presence known. In a vocal group, that's easy. Solo hikers often shout. I also banged my trekking poles together or whistled. If you're in proximity to a black bear, stay put and let it move away so it doesn't feel threatened. If that's unsuccessful, retreat slowly, talk and avoid eye contact. Others, like me, allow it to leave but make our presence known vocally. Unfamiliar and sudden sounds scare most bears off, but not all of them. This is where you could, for want of a better description, be in the shit. Rogue bears share similarities with a drunk in the pub who wants to fight. They'll glare for a while, decide they dislike you, advance threateningly, look angry and clench their fists. You have 2 choices: stand your ground or get out of the bar. Fleeing is a sign of weakness. It shows vulnerability, fear, and is the only excuse they need. It's the same with bears. However, in the rare instances of aggression, against your natural instincts, stay put. Run and you're their mid-morning snack. Plus they get to play chase to boot. Even scarier is the bluff charge, the ultimate game of chicken. Holding your ground shows strength. Stand still, shout, raise your arms and pray. I battled my bear phobia for years and nearly didn't hike the PTT because of it. After several sightings, including 2 scary situations, my fears subsided, and I now hold a deep respect for them. Hikers may not even see a bear, encounters are uncommon, and attacks and fatalities rare. Bears are beautiful, misunderstood creatures. Having experienced their behaviour, I understand they're not the problem. We are. Every thru hiker faces difficulties. Some hate the heat, many can't deal with the cold. Others complain of blisters, poor equipment choices, or no alcohol. My frustration stems from the lack of a cooked breakfast and a constant need to satisfy it. Roads meant rides to town and a battle of wills, and the AT in Georgia was riddled with them. I had enough trail food, but the lure of bacon and eggs was often too much to resist. Here's me harping on about wilderness escape, stromomania, fleeing from society, and mid-morning on day 3, reaching the road at Woody Gap, my thoughts turned to hash browns. I don't mean those pathetic, frozen, triangular blocks we have in England either. I refer to a pile of prime, shredded potatoes, crisped to perfection, on a griddle. After 2.5 days, I considered this weak-willed, but in my meagre defence there was mitigating circumstances. I was hungry, rain was imminent, so shelter seemed wise, and transport opportunities were on blatant display in the car park. The hash browns had spoken. Hitchhiking and asking for a ride are separate skill sets. People living near the major US trails are used to thru hikers looking for rides. I crossed the road and placed my backpack on the ground by a guy who'd returned to his car after walking his Dalmatian. Before I could speak, he beat me to it. "How's it going?" he inquired. Great, I replied, walking over. Do you know if there's a town nearby? None are close. He towelled his dog. Something you need? Just a decent breakfast. I'm starving. The Wagon Wheel restaurant's near. Heading that way myself. Happy to give you a ride. I couldn't believe it. I thanked him and climbed in the front seat of his ancient Volvo as Lucy the Dalmatian got relegated to the rear seat. I chatted with Jim during the ride. He was visiting relatives and taking time in the woods with Lucy. I invited him to eat with me, and after finishing he declined my offer of paying, but then paid for us both when I visited the toilet. He even drove me back to the trailhead. Southern hospitality was alive and kicking in Georgia. I didn't forget it and sent him a book when I returned home as thanks. While getting over the shock of seeing a rat snake as I prepared to move from Woody Gap, two guys approached and introduced themselves. Through hikers look different. Our gear veers towards performance as opposed to appearance. For example, lime green shorts with black tights, orange running shoes, a blue balaclava and a silver poncho are perfectly acceptable. Fashion slaves we are not. We appear soiled, even filthy. The guys grow beards, the girls don't consider makeup or leg shaving necessary. Our hair looks like we've been electrocuted. This is our unintentional way of distinguishing ourselves from others. Philip Colelli and Sam Ridge were definitely through hikers. We'd just started, so excessive hair growth wasn't apparent, and we were clean, but their equipment gave them away. Their packs were tiny and their clothes more like jogging apparel. We chatted before making inroads into the 4 miles to the Lance Creek campsite. Woods Hole shelter was a sensible choice, but it was too far and rumours of a storm had circulated. We were keeping our mileage low, so Lance Creek seemed the obvious choice. The site was busy. Bridget and PJ pitched their tents, Krista and her mother arrived while some new faces, Bill and Cassie, cooked their dinner. AT campsites aren't equipped with such distractions as swimming pools, restaurants or bars. In fact, the only facilities are a level area to camp and perhaps a privy. Like the shelters, they were often near water. I glanced at menacing skies. The storm wasn't due until the early hours, but I erected my tent first, just in case. The designated platforms didn't impress me. The obvious problem was their size. I grabbed the last plot, and even my meagre one-person shelter was too big for the space provided. I tried various positions, but the best pitch involved hanging one side off the edge. The guy lines stretched off the platform, resulting in unacceptable staking out points. The saw was rock hard, so I tied it to nearby trees. It stood upright, but not pretty. Appalachian storms are legendary, and during the summer, fierce weather patterns scare the crap out of hikers. The altitude compounds the problem. The highest point on the AT is Clingman's Dome at 6,643 feet, but the trail generally floats along between 4,000 to 5,000 feet, putting it at cloud level. Get caught in inclement conditions on the AT and you're not under the storm, but often in it. For example, during Thanksgiving weekend in 1950, severe low pressure pulled down a mass of Arctic air, forcing warmer air from the south. The result was catastrophic. One of the biggest Appalachian storms recorded dumped several feet of snow, whilst other areas flooded. They reported wind speeds of 140 miles per hour on Bear Mountain in New York, and Mount Washington in New Hampshire, famous for documenting the strongest wind speed ever, anywhere, registered gusts of 160 miles per hour. Temperature extremes ranged from 50 degrees Fahrenheit before the storm to minus 5 degrees Fahrenheit after. Insurance companies lost $67 million, $650 million in today's money. It's known as the Great Appalachian Storm. History didn't repeat itself, but my tent suffered a partial collapse and I endured a sleepless night with a wet fly sheet slapping me around the face. But we survived, emerging damp and shell-shocked. Mountain Crossings outfitter at Neil Gap, 32 miles into the AT, had a fantastic reputation. I'd heard great reports about the equipment store and hostel. This premier outdoor shop in Georgia was right on the trail. I climbed with Arnie from Maine, Bridget, Bill and Cassie up the 1,500 feet to Blood Mountain, passing a group of hikers at Slaughter Creek. We chatted with Greg, who said a bear had ripped off the cables near his camp and stole his food bag. He'd heard the commotion, likening it to a horror movie. Names like Slaughter Creek and Blood Mountain, plus a rampant bear, weren't filling me with confidence. We looked forward to Neil Gap and made light work of the 7 miles to US 19, crossed the road and entered the shop, eager for sustenance. As sunlight flooded the deck, we hung out damp tents, bags and waterproofs. The shop advertised drying facilities, so I grabbed my sleeping bag before being directed up a flight of stairs. Sam had the same idea and came too. Opening the top loader, I heard someone stomping up the steps behind us. I turned to see a staff member glaring at me. "What you doing?" he demanded. "Drying gear," we replied in unison. He moved closer. "Don't put your dirty bag in the dryer." His rudeness surprised me. "Excuse me? It isn't dirty." "I don't care. Don't put your dirty-ass bag in there." Now this offended me. My bag was new and not dirty. I also knew my arse was relatively clean. "My bag isn't dirty, it's damp," I offered, with upturned hands trying to cool the situation. "I've only slept in it twice, I just need to dry it out." "You're not putting your dirty-ass bag in the dryer." It was a role reversal. Normally it's rude customers and polite staff. I kept calm as we exchanged rapid comments. Sam tried keeping up, his head flicking between us quicker than the Wimbledon final. I was about to retort again, but he interrupted me. "Get out of here," he demanded. "Excuse me? Leave, get out." "I'm not going anywhere, I've done nothing wrong." Sam's head, fatigued from switching from side to side, swapped to nodding in agreement instead. "You're not using the dryer without a cover bag." I took a deep, calming breath. "Listen, mate, what exactly is the problem? I want to dry it, it's wet, not dirty. If I need a covering bag, I'm happy to use one. Where are they?" "Borrow one from the shop," and he stormed out. We retreated as one would a bear encounter. "Why didn't he say that in the first place?" I asked Sam. Between bone-shaking hysterics, he replied, "I have absolutely no idea." I bought snacks before returning to the deck, now transformed by thru-hikers drying out their gear. Others arrived, including Bridget, and I went inside to buy her a gift. Her preference for pink-coloured equipment was clear from various items hanging off her pack. I returned and handed her a carabiner in a subtle shade of flamingo. "It will go with the rest of your collection," I pointed out. She smiled. "Thanks." I left with Sam and spotted the guy who'd confronted me. Despondent about our altercation, which I knew would play on me, I tried to disperse any friction. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, look, sorry for the misunderstanding with the dryer. No harm done." He turned, agitated. "Yeah, it's okay, but I'm ex-military. I tell people what to do, and they do it." On the defensive, and miffed he still had an attitude, despite my apology, I replied, "Well, I hate to state the bloody obvious, mate, but you're not in the army anymore. You're on Civvy Street, serving customers." I returned to the woods, digesting why some people, or perhaps civilization, frustrate me and send me packing often to the outdoors. I know I can be curt when cornered, but I find solace that the world is full of kind souls. Sam kept me company, and we chatted away the 7 miles to Whitley Gap Shelter, where others relaxed after the day's walk. I searched for camp spots and noticed a faint trail which lured me. The woodland thinned and opened to a flat clearing before the ridge dropped. The scenery was immense. I pitched my tent between 2 trees which creaked and groaned in the wind, affording me a contemplative view. Noise and chatter from the shelter was less obtrusive, but still comforting, and I returned to socialise over dinner. Desperado, a new face, sat opposite. I inquired about her name. It originated from the song Desperado, which she used to sing at karaoke. As I ate, our conversation turned into an interview. She fired questions between noting my answers. She conversed little, merely muttering "uh-huh" after I answered. Then she let rip with my favourite. "So, Fuzzy, you're British, right?" I stared into my pot, seeking savoury rice salvation. "Shit, not again." "I'm English, yeah." She nodded and scribbled on a pad. I peeked at the writing, but she cupped her hand around the notepad. Why do you say you're English?" "Because I'm from England." "Look, it doesn't matter, no offence, but can we talk about something else? Sorry, but there are too many questions." I smiled to lighten the situation. After my hint, she stopped. We made small chat before satiating my evening social fix, and I retreated to the solitude of my camp. I stood near my tent, watched the ground fall away, and let an Appalachian breeze touch me, lifting the bare branches. A Georgia moon highlighted low clouds drifting over distant mountains, white ghosts surfing silhouetted ridgelines. To the west, a yellow glimmer, the sole reminder of sunset, merged into a sombre sky. I crept into my little haven, wrapped my sleeping bag around me and gazed through the open door until, too weak to resist any longer, I shut my eyes. Chatter floated over in the morning, waking me. I packed and left, heading for the Blue Mountain Shelter, 12 miles away as I contemplated trail names. Still keeping my daily targets between 10 and 15 miles, I covered the distance and arrived early. It was strange having an empty shelter to myself, and the silence lent a solemn air, a solitary woodpecker making the only sound. I sat, studied the data book, checked my progress, and researched the following day's hike. Jerry appeared, sitting 10 feet away reading his Kindle. "Bloody hell, Jerry, how do you do that? You scared me." "Do what?" he responded nonchalantly. "I'm alone, and then suddenly you're here like a ninja. Wait a minute, that's it." He looked surprised. "What's what?" "I might have a trail name for you." He seemed dubious but curious. "Go on, I'm listening." "Well, you appear from nowhere and read your Kindle a lot. What do you say to Kindle Ninja?" I thought it a decent first effort. His eyebrows rose contemplatively as he scratched his chin. "Fuzzy, I like it." The mob arrived and Blue Mountain came to life as I grabbed my toilet paper to take care of an urgent matter. "Fuzzy, the privy is taken. Queue's here," Philip shouted from behind the shelter. I sat with him, Sam, Little Josh and a guy called Central Booking. The privy only offered one place, so as people returned, the next took their turn. Hilariously, it became obvious how critical each hiker's need was as they sped off into the woods, speed being directly proportional to urgency. Others joined the ranks, so queue numbers remained constant. Of all the places to get to know people, waiting in line for the toilet proved priceless, and privy sitting, as we called it, caught on. If someone didn't want to chat, fair enough. The recent arrivals changed the atmosphere and implemented subject changes, making for varied conversations. With limited time in the queue, we discussed topics animatedly and gained character snapshots. Plus, we joked and chastised with those returning from their business who had taken too much time and made impressive noises. One such culprit on both counts was Jonathan, whose faltering head torch heralded his overdue return from the darkness 10 minutes after his departure. "Bloody hell, mate," I began. "That must have been some dump." Little Josh covered his mouth and giggled, embarrassed by my forwardness. Jonathan paused. "Man, you have no idea the amount of shit." Most of the group collapsed in hysterics, and as I glanced at Sam, trail name number 2 of the evening beckoned. I nudged Philip. "Hey, I might have Sam's trail name." "You know the face he pulls when he's inhaled too much cigarette smoke?" Philip giggled. "Yep. It has to be Daffy Duck, doesn't it?" Sam's lower lip receded while his upper one extended, which looked like a beak. Philip laughed in confirmation and Sam held no objections, although he shortened it to plain Daffy. And finally gaining access to the privy, I returned to the tent, chuckling, happy not only in the moment, but in my life. I still cherish fond memories of Blue Mountain.